The seven wonders of the ancient world are all incredible structures from the classical era. Yet, while 6 of these monuments have been located, one has never been found, leading some to argue that it was a fictional creation. That wonder is the infamous Hanging Gardens of Babylon, a lush paradise that would have been unlike anything else on Earth. Unfortunately, details surrounding the gardens are sparse, which has left experts stumped for centuries. But a recent finding by researchers at Oxford University may have finally uncovered a reason for the lack of evidence. Experts expose evidence that could pinpoint the location of mythical seventh wonder. The Greek builder Philo first came up with his 7 things to be seen in approximately 225 BC. These days, we refer to these as the 7 wonders of the ancient world. They include the statue of Zeus at Olympia, the pyramids at Giza, and the temple of Artemis at Ephesus. Over the years, Philo's compilation of his ancient wonders has been edited and refined to reflect different eras. Nonetheless, his original 7 remain the defining selection. And each symbolizes feats of engineering and scale that would have been considered astonishing in their day. Sadly, only one of Philo's 7 wonders of the ancient world still stands relatively unscathed today. That's the pyramids at Giza, which have stood for more than 4,000 years. 5 others have since been destroyed, although there's sufficient archaeological data to substantiate their existence. But while 6 of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, whether standing or not, have been accounted for, one has long eluded archaeologists. That mysterious site is the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. They're said to have been created by King Nebuchadrezzar II of Babylon, who reigned between 605 and 561 BC and, according to records, would have been like literal paradise on earth. However, no real evidence has been found of the Hanging Gardens of Babylon's existence. For instance, no remnants have ever been found, and Babylonian records make no mention of them. With that in mind, archaeologists are none the wiser about their potential whereabouts or what caused them to be included in Philo's list. Given that the gardens were supposedly situated in Babylon, Philo would have had to venture east to see them. The rest of his 7 wonders all lie in or around the Mediterranean's easterly regions, an area that was Greek or Hellenist in its outlook and way of life. However, Babylon was not. Babylon was the capital of Babylonia, a nation situated in Mesopotamia, the remnants of which now sit within modern-day Iraq. It was originally established as a Euphrates River port 4 millennia ago and subsequently grew into one of the most prominent metropolises of its era. Babylon's might increased during the rule of King Hammurabi, who reigned between 1792 and 1750 BC. Through his leadership, Babylon overcame neighboring states and eventually annexed a sizable proportion of Mesopotamia. And this state became known as Babylonia, which then prospered and saw unprecedented wealth, leading to a surge of exquisite architecture. Babylon then experienced a second resurgence between 626 BC and 539 BC, when the Neo-Babylonian Empire emerged. This new dominion was the planet's mightiest nation after triumphing over the Assyrians in 612 BC. But unfortunately, the empire didn't endure, and in 539 BC Persian forces spearheaded the fall of Babylon. While the influence of Babylon waned, the epic architecture of its prosperous years became the stuff of legend. The so-called Tower of Babel, a structure built to reach the heavens, is even mentioned in the Bible. Other monuments such as the city walls and the Ishtar Gate are remembered to this day for their scale and beauty, respectively. Then, of course, there are the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, which were immortalized by Philo in the 3rd century BC. He'd arrived in the region a century after the Persians and Babylon had been quelled by the ancient kingdom of Macedon under Alexander the Great. Nonetheless, it's likely that the area and its architecture will have remained unusual to Philo and his readers. According to Philo, the wondrous Hanging Gardens were suspended on wooden shafts that sat on stone pillars. The timber formed a trellis, which in turn contained carefully irrigated soils that was planted with an impressive selection of vegetation. Philo described the spectacle as a labor of cultivation suspended above the heads of the spectators. Alongside Philo's account of the Hanging Gardens of Babylon are other Greek and Roman sources that paint the site in an equally enticing manner. They often talk of dense greenery that sat on terraces that towered at more than 70 feet. These plants were said to be in stark contrast to the bleak appearance of most of Babylon at the time. According to these sources, the Hanging Gardens were an assault on the senses. They overwhelmed the eyes with their remarkable greenery, while the scents of flowers left a sweet-smelling perfume in the air. Furthermore, aside from plant life, the gardens were said to be decorated with pillars and statues as well. So, what was such a vision dedicated to? Well, according to legend, King Nebuchadnezzar II built the Hanging Gardens for his wife Ametis, as she missed the lush greenery of her home region of Media, which today lies in Iran. But bringing the arid desert landscape to life was no mean feat, especially in the 6th century BC. Researchers have speculated that in order to create the Hanging Gardens of Babylon in the way that they've been described, an intricate irrigation process would have been required. Such an arrangement would have been a remarkable feat of engineering, using cisterns, water wheels and pumps to transport the Euphrates' waters inland. However, despite the romantic story of Nebuchadnezzar II's display of love for his wife, there's still no solid evidence of the Hanging Gardens of Babylon's existence. The many Greek and Roman references to the site were penned hundreds of years after the site is said to have perished. And since then, archaeologists' quests to locate the gardens have proved fruitless. In the early 1900s, German researcher Robert Koldewey led the earliest archaeological digs in the ancient city of Babylon. His team spent almost 2 decades trying to search for the Hanging Gardens, in fact. At one point, he thought he'd found part of the wonder's irrigation complex. However, most experts now believe that the structure he'd uncovered was likely to have been a storage center. A decade after Koldewey's expedition, British historian Leonard Woolley claimed he'd found evidence of the Hanging Gardens in Ur, a metropolis around 150 miles from Babylon. He believed that a series of apertures at regular intervals in the brickwork he uncovered could have been an indication of an irrigation scheme. However, it would seem that, like Koldewey before him, Woolley had mistakenly linked his discovery to the Hanging Gardens. The holes that he believed were signs of irrigation were most likely created to allow the brickwork to dry out evenly when the structure was built. So, once again, the wonder had eluded archaeologists. Given the lack of archaeological and documentary evidence associated with the Hanging Gardens, then, in recent years researchers have started looking at their problem from another angle. Perhaps the wonder has remained so elusive not because it didn't exist, but because it was never in Babylon. Maybe it was situated somewhere else altogether. Dr. Stephanie Dawley is an honorary research fellow and a member of the Oxford University's Oriental Institute in England. And she's among those experts who suspect that no one has ever unearthed any remnants of the Hanging Gardens in Babylon because they were constructed somewhere else. What's more, she outlined her reasoning in her 2013 book The Mystery of the Hanging Garden of Babylon. An elusive world wonder traced. The idea that the Hanging Gardens weren't actually in Babylon isn't so outrageous. That's because Greek and Roman sources often mixed real-life accounts with those taken from myths. Furthermore, retellings of Mesopotamian history from that era regularly conflate the two kingdoms of Babylonia and Assyria. For instance, the historian Diodorus stated that the Assyrian Empire's capital, Nineveh, was by the river Euphrates. However, it was actually located beside the river Tigris. Furthermore, in his description of the walls of Babylon, Diodorus described in detail a depiction of Queen Semiramis with a spear. This has never been unearthed in Babylon, but a similar scene is found on a Nineveh palace wall. Given the tendency for Greco-Roman sources to mix up locations within Mesopotamia, then, it's not inconceivable that ancient scholars could have mixed up the location of the Hanging Gardens of Babylon as well. And after almost 20 years of investigating the wonder, Dawley has come to suspect that it was in fact located in Nineveh. That's a few hundred miles north of the city they came to be associated with. While Nebuchadnezzar II has been credited with creating the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, Dawley suggested that it was actually an Assyrian ruler named Sennacherib who's responsible for the wonder. She claims that he constructed them in the 7th century BC. As a result, the gardens could also be 100 years older than previously thought. Researchers at Oxford University, where Dawley is based, came to such a conclusion after making fresh translations of ancient inscriptions about Assyria. The engravings were, in fact, the records of Sennacherib's rule, which occurred between 704 and 681 BC. On one of the stones, Sennacherib details the extensive monuments he erected. An inscription reads, "I raised the height of the surroundings of the palace to be a wonder for all peoples, a high garden, imitating the Amanus mountains I laid out next to it, with all kinds of aromatic plants." The description of Sennacherib's lush spectacle of course mirrors those of the Hanging Gardens. And while Greco-Roman sources suggest that Nebuchadrezzar designed his gardens to mimic the Persian landscape, Sennacherib's creation took inspiration from Mount Amanus, which now lies in Turkey. Furthermore, the records of Sennacherib's rule also described a screw designed to lift water reminiscent of that developed 400 years later by Archimedes. Indeed, the ruler was known for his innovative approach to technology. So, it may be that such an invention was used to water the king's grand gardens. Moreover, the Sennacherib translations weren't the only evidence that pointed towards Nineveh as the true location of the Hanging Gardens. A dig in the city, which is located in Iraq close to Mosul, uncovered an impressive aqueduct complex. And it dated from the reign of the inventive king. The aqueduct found in Nineveh was constructed from a couple of million stone blocks, and it transported water over the Jerwin Valley. Furthermore, an inscription on it read, "Sennacherib, king of the world over a great distance, I had a watercourse directed to the environs of Nineveh." Interestingly, an aqueduct is depicted in a relief made during the reign of Sennacherib's grandson, Ashurbanipal. In the artwork, the watercourse supplies a luscious sloping garden with a pavilion at its top. Consequently, some experts believe that it shows the famous Hanging Gardens, though not in Babylon. Further evidence that appears to make Nineveh a more likely candidate as the location of the Hanging Gardens is the city's topography. The Assyrian capital is more mountainous than its Babylonian counterpart. As a result, elevating water to the heights of the garden would have been much more straightforward than in the flat terrain of Babylon. According to Dali, the source of the confusion over where the Hanging Gardens were located could be down to the fact that Babylon was invaded by the Assyrians in 689 BC. After that, Nineveh became known as New Babylon. The name was so customary, in fact, that King Sennacherib even gave the gates of the city the same name as Babylon's. Furthermore, Dali believes that Alexander the Great may have spotted Nineveh's sophisticated aqueduct complex in 331 BC on his way to battle in Gaugamela. She argues that his curiosity about the watercourse could have sparked the story of the Hanging Gardens, which were later mistakenly said to be in Babylon. If Dali's assertions that the Hanging Gardens were located in Nineveh are correct, it would put to bed rumors that the ancient wonder was simply a historical mirage. However, it would also probably indicate that a slight name change would be in order. Babylon, of course, would no longer lay claim to the site. Such a rewriting of the history books is bound to cause a stir. And Dali herself realized that her theory regarding the location of the Hanging Gardens would divide opinion among experts. Nonetheless, to her at least, the Nineveh paradise was very much a wonder in the fact that it was magnificent in conception, spectacular in engineering, and brilliant in artistry. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.